Welcome to another episode of Shadows of the Tarot. Elise's career had taken off in ways she had never imagined. Her reputation as a gifted tarot reader had not only brought her a steady stream of clients, but had now attracted the attention of a prestigious high-ticket affiliate program. They had extended an invitation for her to speak at one of their exclusive conferences, an event known for hosting elite professionals and thought leaders in the industry. To her surprise, they had even offered to cover all her expenses, including her flight and accommodation, a gesture that seemed almost too good to be true. At first, skepticism gnawed at her. She had heard of scams that lured people in with extravagant offers, only to leave them stranded or worse. The deal seemed too generous, too effortless. But her doubts began to ease when one of the women who had previously interviewed her, someone she trusted, personally reassured her that everything was legitimate. As if to solidify that reassurance, she soon received official confirmation of her flight details and hotel booking. The realization hit her all at once. This was real. A surge of exhilaration coursed through her. Elise had never set foot outside her home country, never even entertained the idea of traveling overseas, yet here she was, about to embark on an all-expenses-paid journey. After the harrowing events of the past few weeks, the prospect of a change of scenery felt like a lifeline. A chance to breathe, to step away from the shadows that had begun to cling to her life. More than anything, she welcomed the idea of a holiday, a break from the relentless unease that had settled into her bones. The police had taken Elise in for questioning, and frustration gnawed at her as they relentlessly bombarded her with inquiries about Tammy's death. It was the same exhausting cycle. Over and over they pressed her, dissecting every moment leading up to that tragic night. No matter how many times she insisted on her innocence, they kept circling back to the same accusation. Tammy had been pushed from the balcony. Their tone was laced with suspicion, their eyes scanning her for the slightest crack in her story. Elise remained firm, her voice steady as she declared, once again, that it had been an accident. She had replayed the scene in her mind 1,000 times. Tammy lunging for the tarot cards, the struggle, the sheer horror of watching her fall. But the detectives weren't satisfied. They leaned in closer, their questions shifting. Now they wanted answers about the disappearance of Detective Carter. Elise exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the interrogation table. "Eddie came to see me earlier in the day," she explained. "He told me I'd need to come in for questioning, but after that, he left. He said he had something urgent to take care of. I don't know what it was. He didn't tell me." The detectives exchanged glances, their frustration mirroring her own. It felt as if they were going around in circles, chasing shadows without ever getting closer to the truth. Elise could see it in their faces, the doubt, the uncertainty. They weren't convinced, but they had nothing concrete to hold her on. One of them sighed, rubbing his temples. "Would you like to have a lawyer present?" Elise shook her head. "That won't be necessary. I haven't committed any crime." Still, they remained unconvinced. Tammy's death weighed heavily on the case, and despite Elise's unwavering stance, the police continued to believe she had been pushed. But aside from the position of the body, they had little to no substantial evidence to support the theory. And without something more concrete, something undeniable, they weren't sure if it would be enough to take the case to trial. No other officers were aware of Eddie's growing obsession with Elise and her tarot deck. The truth of his fixation had slipped through the cracks, just like he had, vanishing into the void, leaving behind only unanswered questions and lingering suspicion. The tragedies surrounding Elise seemed to defy explanation, as though time itself had swallowed them whole, leaving nothing but eerie echoes in their wake. After hours of grueling interrogation, the police finally informed Elise that she was free to go, for now. They made it clear that the investigation was far from over and that she could be called in again at any moment. But there was one crucial detail they hadn't mentioned. They hadn't instructed her to remain in the country. That single omission was all Elise needed to confirm her next move. There was nothing tying her down, no lingering attachments, no reason to stay in a place that had become suffocating with suspicion. A holiday would be a welcome respite, a chance to step away from the weight of everything that had happened. As if fate had already paved the way, she realized she was more than prepared. She still had a valid passport from a trip she had planned the year before, a trip that had never happened. Now, however, there was nothing standing in her way. Everything had fallen into place seamlessly, as though the universe itself was nudging her toward this escape. The thought sent a rush of excitement through her. Soon, she would be far away from the dark cloud that had settled over her life. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that something amazing was about to happen. As was her habit, Elise decided to consult the tarot before making any final decisions. Despite everything that had happened, she still found comfort in her antique deck, unshaken by the whispers of fate that seemed to follow her readings. She had always used the cards as a guide, a means to navigate life's uncertainties, and this moment was no different. With practiced ease, she shuffled the deck, the familiar weight of the cards grounding her. As she spread them out and drew a single card, her breath caught slightly, the world. She had performed countless readings for others, but never before had this particular card surfaced for her own fate. Elise studied the image, tracing her fingertips along the intricate artwork. The world was a powerful omen, one of completion, fulfillment, and new beginnings. It symbolized knowing one's place in the grand scheme of things, the successful conclusion of one cycle before stepping into another. It represented travel, the freedom to carve out one's own destiny, and the promise of something greater beyond the horizon. A slow smile crept onto her lips. If there had been any lingering doubts about this trip, they vanished in that moment. The universe itself seemed to be telling her that she was meant to go, that this journey would bring not just distance from her troubles but something more, an opportunity, perhaps even a fresh start. And who knew? Maybe she would meet someone along the way. A stranger, a kindred spirit, a new friend, someone who could bring light into her life just when she needed it most. The thought filled her with an unfamiliar yet welcome sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like an open road rather than a trap waiting to snap shut. Once her flight was officially booked, Elise had expected to feel relief, maybe even excitement. Instead, the nightmares returned, more vivid and relentless than before. Each night, she found herself running through a dense, shadowy forest, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something burning. The winding path beneath her feet flickered with an eerie glow, and as she looked down, horror gripped her. Feet, severed and ablaze, lined the trail like grotesque lanterns lighting her way. The flames crackled, licking at the darkness, yet the feet did not burn away. They remained, smoldering, a grotesque and impossible sight. She would wake each time in a cold sweat, gasping for breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. The dream made no sense, and yet a deep, unsettling feeling took root inside her. Could it be the cards? Were they angry with her, warning her of something she had yet to understand? One night, after jolting awake yet again, she reached for her tarot deck, cradling it in her hands as if to soothe a restless spirit. "Don't worry," she whispered into the silence of her room. "I'm not leaving you behind. I'll take you with me." As if in response, the air around her felt lighter, the suffocating weight of the nightmare easing just a little. The dreams didn't vanish completely, but they grew less frequent, their intensity fading into the background. Still, a lingering unease remained. The cards had always guided her, but now she couldn't help but wonder, were they protecting her? Or warning her of something far worse? The day had finally arrived. Elise packed her bag carefully, ensuring everything she needed was neatly tucked away. But there was one item she handled with particular care, the antique tin that housed her tarot deck. She hesitated for a brief moment before placing it securely in her carry-on luggage, as if reassuring herself that they would be safe by her side. At the airport, the usual buzz of travelers filled the air, The hum of conversations, the rolling of suitcases, the crisp voice of announcements overhead. Elise moved through the security line, her thoughts a tangle of anticipation and lingering unease. But as her bag passed through the scanner, a sharp beep pierced the air. "Ma'am, we need to check your bag," a security officer said, gesturing for her to step aside. Elise nodded, already knowing the likely culprit. As the officer unzipped her carry-on, she reached inside and pulled out the small worn tin. "It's just my tarot cards," she explained, flicking it open just enough for them to see. The officer studied it for a moment before nodding. "That's fine. You're good to go." With a small breath of relief, Elise repacked her bag and proceeded to her gate. Soon, she was boarding the plane, maneuvering her carry-on into the overhead locker. Just as she was adjusting it, another passenger beside her was doing the same. "Tricky sometimes, isn't it?" the man said with a small chuckle, shifting his bag to fit. Elise turned to him, smiling at the shared inconvenience. "Yeah, these spaces always seem smaller than they should be." Their hands briefly brushed as they adjusted their belongings, and for a fleeting second, a strange sense of familiarity stirred within Elise. But the moment passed as they both settled into their seats, neither realizing that this wasn't the first time they had spoken. Something unseen lingered between them, an unspoken thread connecting them across time. But for now, neither of them knew it. Elise had drifted into a restless sleep, her head resting against the cool window. But peace did not find her. Instead, the nightmare returned, more vivid, more relentless. She was running through the darkened forest again, the path beneath her feet lined with burning, severed limbs. The scent of smoke filled her lungs, choking her, and just as she turned a corner, she saw something new, an enormous winged shadow descending from the sky. A deafening roar filled her ears. She jolted awake, heart pounding in her chest. But the terror didn't fade. The cabin lights flickered, and a sudden jolt shook the plane violently. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers as the aircraft lurched again, dipping sharply to one side. Overhead compartments rattled, a few bursting open as bags tumbled to the aisle. The unsettling chime of the seatbelt sign echoed above, followed by the captain's tense voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and fasten your seatbelts. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence." But the turbulence didn't subside, it worsened. The plane shuddered violently, the roar of the engine struggling against an unseen force. Gasps turned into screams as the aircraft pitched forward in a sudden stomach-dropping descent. The air hostesses moved swiftly, bracing themselves against the walls. One of them tried to reassure the passengers, her voice steady but strained. "Please stay seated. Do not panic." But panic was already taking hold. People clutched at their armrests, eyes wild with terror. Elise turned to Sam, her fingers digging into the armrest between them. His face was pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the seat in front of him. Then, with an eerie suddenness, the oxygen masks dropped from above. Elise barely had time to register what was happening before she reached for hers, her hands trembling. She pulled it over her face, taking deep, frantic breaths, but it felt useless. Sam did the same, inhaling sharply, his wide eyes darting toward her. The plane buckled again. A sickening tilt, a deafening roar. Then, impact. A blinding force slammed through the cabin as metal crumpled like paper. The deafening sound of destruction filled the air. The world tilted, twisted, shattered. And then, silence. The plane had come crashing down into the vast, unforgiving desert. It was a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. The wreckage lay scattered across the barren desert, a twisted mass of scorched metal and smoldering debris. Flames licked hungrily at the remains of the fuselage, thick plumes of black smoke rising into the sky like a signal of despair. The air was filled with the acrid stench of burning fuel and the eerie silence that follows unspeakable tragedy. Only 5 people had walked away from the devastation, their figures barely visible through the swirling dust and heat waves radiating from the wreckage. Disoriented and wounded, they stumbled away from the ruins, the shock of survival written on their faces. But among them, Sam and Elise were nowhere to be found. Their seats, their voices, their presence, all swallowed by the merciless impact. Due to the remoteness of the crash site, it took hours before the rescue teams finally arrived. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights sweeping across the wasteland, illuminating the twisted remains of what had once been a thriving vessel of life. Paramedics moved swiftly, guiding the survivors to safety, but the tragedy had already been written in fire and steel. For many, there was no rescue, no second chance, no escape. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the wreckage, the desert wind carried only the whisper of lives lost to the unforgiving void. Nearly 2 months had passed since the catastrophic crash, but the scar it left upon the desert remained, a graveyard of twisted metal, charred wreckage, and whispers of lives lost. The site had drawn curiosity seekers, journalists, and investigators, but now it was quiet, abandoned to the relentless wind and shifting sands. A travel blogger, eager to capture the eerie remnants for an upcoming article, made his way across the barren landscape. He had read about the disaster, seen the reports, but standing amidst the wreckage was something else entirely. The silence was heavy, oppressive, as if the land itself remembered the tragedy. As he snapped photos of the skeletal remains of the aircraft, something caught his eye, a glimmer, a tiny flash of sunlight reflecting off an object half buried in the sand. Intrigued, he stepped closer, crouching down to inspect it. Brushing aside the coarse grains, he uncovered a small antique tin, its once polished surface now dulled by time and dust. With a curious frown, he lifted it, rubbing away the dirt with his sleeve. The metal felt oddly warm against his skin, despite the coolness of the desert breeze. Turning it over in his hands, he debated whether to open it right then and there. Instead, he slipped it into his pocket, unaware of the weight of what he had just claimed. Not knowing the shadows of the tarot deck had been waiting to be found. This episode concludes The Shadow of the Tarot. I hope you enjoyed the episodes. Stay tuned on this channel for my next chilling story. Like, subscribe, and share to others.